motion to approve the minutes? We have a motion, and I get a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Picking up where we left off last week, and you just jump in anywhere you'd like, here's what we've got. We've got numbered ballots and the numbered stickers. I have, since last week, added 2 stickers. That's okay. You'll notice they're hand. I didn't put them back in my computer, so I just wrote the numbers on them. Now, the city attorney advises us that we're going to want your names on these. You'll have your ballot, and we can. And I think, as I think Howard and others suggested, and we talked about at the beginning of the last meeting, we'll just kind of not present anything, but see if anything that needs clarification on this before we go forward. So before you vote, we'll just make sure there's not something that we're missing, so that there isn't any confusion. There's a question unanswered. And then with these, you'll put your 2 reds are the highest priority. The dull green, or the sort of lime green, are the others, which are all same weight. And then the 2 extra green ones, because that's all I had actually, are simply extra dots. Okay, but the only ones with highest priority are the 2 reds. So you're going to get a total of 8 or 7.
So which ones are revenue generating? The
Whichever
blue?
one. Here's the way. When we did this, so many of the things we looked at had a revenue side and it had a cost side, and
Some had both.
and both. And we both came up with this same observation. So it won't come up any different. If you just have a couple more dots, use them wherever you will, and it'll shake out. You're going to have some things that some of you think, I'm more interested in revenue than I am in some of these cost savings. Then you can weigh those. But these are not split up between revenues and cost savings and reductions. So you got enough here that it covers your interest in both areas. And I don't think no matter what we did with this, it's going to change that distribution. So you put your names on. Then when you're done with this, yes. I'm sorry, excuse me.
Oh, that's okay. Marvin Fair. Just a quick question. Charlie says he's colorblind. Can I help him?
Shades of color.
Yes. Well, not where he places them, though. But the long one,
Which one should
Really, put the red one right here.
we'll point them out to you. Yes, sir. Yes, you can.
Real quick, tonight we have a phone on the table behind us. Directly look at it below a speaker. So if somebody calls in, they can hear it. And we're testing it in another room. We can hear that it's working. Tonight, what we need you to do is to make sure that your voice comes over strong enough over the speakers to avoid feedback. When you speak, you need to actually, instead of putting them on stands, you need to actually grab the microphone, put a couple inches away from your mouth, and speak directly into the microphone.
So we'll hand those out. We'll go through this, and we'll hand those out in just a minute. Now, I'd also like to suggest, and we can talk about this at the end, seeing how you feel about it. Tonight's the 7th. What I'd like to suggest is, and Mike and I will work collaboratively on this, that based on what you identify, we'll draft a report to bring back to you for next week's meeting. I'd like to get it posted by Monday. It's possible it could be as late as Tuesday. It won't be posted later than Tuesday. But we'll draft a report, and you'll have that to look at. And then next week, we'll go over that report and see what we're missing, see what needs to be changed. We'll make those changes and come back. New meeting, different day, on the 19th. 19th is a Monday. And what hopefully we'll have by that time is have taken your comments from the 14th, woven them into the fabric of the final presentation, and bring back to you a final that you could sign and be satisfied that it covers your interests. And then ideally then, a week from the 19th, and I'm going to tell you the reason it's the 19th is I'm in Sacramento on the 21st, 22nd. Our schedule didn't go out this far, so I have bookings in other places. But the 19th also gives us a week to make sure everything is tidy before we present it to the council on the 26th of April. And when we talked earlier in the month, we said, let's wrap it up by the end of April. I think it's very doable in this last 3 meetings. And so what should happen on the 19th would be hopefully minor corrections, minor changes, which we would simply make, Mike and I, and prepare and send you a final that would then go to the council. How you want to present it to the council is up to you. So you work that out. But we believe we can have a final report by then. Then I know some of you have talked about continuing as a group. That's completely up to you. That's the end of this process. If that were to occur, there would be another structure, another system, but certainly not simply an extension of this. Is that okay? That was kind of what we talked about last week. I just want to make sure I'm not missing something.
Howard Broadbeck. I'm not sure I understand what it is you're passing out now.
The ballot.
And what are we going to do with the ballot?
You're going to write your name on it, and you're going to use these stickers to vote.
But we're voting on the exact items that are...
Precisely the same items there. These are actually, yes, right off of this.
Okay, well, what I was asking for last week was that we should discuss these items before we ever vote on them.
Well, that's what I said just a minute ago. First, we'll go through each one of these, see if there's any points that you'd like to discuss before we hand these out. And then you would vote following the discussion, and that would be the primary business
And
for tonight.
so after any discussion, you're going to make modifications to the ones that are posted up there so that as we vote, we know what we're voting on?
If necessary.
Okay.
And it will do, and any changes that we would make, we'll use the voting machines, and we will do those in a you know, we're not just going to be brainstorming. We'll do votes for things that would change anything that you've already identified. He's down there, yeah. Okay, so let's, and I'm going to have to rely on notes being taken, because tonight the notes are going to be very important. Because I'm not going to be able to capture everything unless it's something that you actually want to change. So going from right to left, this was your mission. Become informed about city services, provide input on services and programs, identify the savings.
Excuse me, Howard Broadbeck. Are you passing these out now? Because I can't read any of the stuff
I'm
you're
sorry,
looking
these are
at
the
right
same
now.
ones that we passed out last week. Exactly the same thing.
Okay.
Passed out last week.
Handing out this again.
The one that people wanted to study. So this is our mission. This is where we started. The first one that's listed on that first page is free salaries for 2010, 2011. And what we're doing now is not saying I like that or I don't like that, but if there's something that, and by the way, when you get to your top ones, we'll go back to the top ones and ask for you to identify some of the key subsets of that you'd like particular attention to, so we can get a skeletal structure maybe of something that we can turn into a report. So the first one is free salaries for 2010, 2011.
A question is, isn't that already being done?
We haven't, in this discussion, these are the ones you landed on. Right? Are they already being done? Is that already being done, John?
2010 and 11 is still up to the council, but that is going to be done.
Okay, so that's going to be one of John's recommendations. It's not necessarily
But
done.
it's one of our recommendations. That's the question.
Not necessarily done, but I think it's what you would like to see done.
It's in his
Yeah, if it's already one of John's recommendations, it's not something I'd want to waste my vote on.
But fine. Well, I don't know.
I'm not sure.
I mean, Scott Mikes, I mean, not necessarily, I guess. I mean, we have to think about the fact that, I mean, if you agree with, if that's one of John's recommendations and that's something you wholeheartedly agree with as well, I mean, you would think, I mean, if that's what we would agree with as a group, then it'd be a little bit more backup coming from all of us as opposed to just John, I guess, is the point I'd think.
Other comments on that, on number one? So you got the suggestion that we have two suggestions. One is that if you favor that and you say it, then that adds strength to an item, even though it's already on the table. It provides additional strength in council hearing that. And the other suggestion is take it off, because if it looks like it's going anyway, why spend our time on that? Is there any other comment? Anybody feel? Yes, sir.
Charlie Kagan. I'm looking at this, and I'm also looking at others here, and we're talking about increasing the health insurance payments for the employees, and what I think we're doing is hurting them twice by doing that, and I think if in this instance it should be either of the two.
I don't know what you're talking about. Tell me why.
I'm talking about the first issue about freezing salaries. And we have something, one of these talks about increasing the employees' health insurance payment.
Yeah.
And I just don't feel right about doing both.
And if I can piggyback off of that idea, that's something I noticed in quite a few of them is, reduce, and this is just my thoughts, reducing employee compensation, engaging employees in identifying cost reduction scenarios, reducing employee compensation to furloughs, reduce employee compensation for pay reduction, and then also, of course, the free salaries, too. It seems like it all kind of is one thing calling for one discussion, I guess. I mean, and that's what I noticed going through that when I was trying to put my vote down. If that's something that I believed in, well, I think it might have been spread out, and it seems like those, well, or when anybody puts in their thoughts, I mean, I guess take that under consideration, that all those different things, it seems like they could have been under one topic and then lead further into it. But I don't know, just my thoughts there.
And we can certainly present it that way in a report.
Well, I agree. We need to combine them all. They are saying all the same thing, not on the reduce employee compensation, furloughs, comma, pay reduction, comma, longevity rate, comma, health insurance, comma.
Well,
Yeah, Howard Broadbeck. What I would add to that is that I think maybe what Scott's getting at is there at least ought to be some consistency. So because I noticed the same things as you're talking about. So for example, in a couple of the revenue items, it said sale of assets, item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4. But under these cost reduction ones, for the primary example being the employee reduction, we have a separate item for each of 4 areas.
Right.
And so to me, that ought to be treated, for consistency's sake, that ought to be treated the same way as we're treating sale of assets and a list. So my recommendation would be we take reduce employee compensation and just make a list and list the 4 things that you've got there, or however many else people would like to add, like furloughs, pay reduction, longevity pay, and health insurance. But that just becomes one item.
I think from a standpoint of putting in a report, absolutely.
No, I'm not talking about a report. We're talking right now about how we want to possibly modify this list that you and Mike came up with.
I
okay?
think hopefully we're trying to get clarity on it, too, so I understand the point. And I want to suggest that when we put the list together, these were not one thing. There were various statements from different people that said different things, and the only thing we added to it was this term, because it seemed to fit in under an umbrella that we will ultimately put them under. But these are very different kinds of things that aren't one thing, other than they all involve the reduction of compensation.
Scott Mikes, can I, well, then my point, this is the way I looked at it then. I mean, because, I know what Howard's saying. If, for instance, I looked, one of the things I was looking at, it says engage employees in identifying cost reduction scenarios. And so I see that as the major topic and say, okay, you guys sit down, figure out cost reduction scenarios, and here are things that we're talking about: longevity pay, health insurance, salaries, furloughs, pay reductions, and stuff like that. I just, that's how I'm viewing it, and so I don't, and so that's how I see it. And so when I see, we vote on it, and then our list starts taking shape through our discussion.
Right.
I mean, so if that one ends up, making it one of the red dots, well, then all that other stuff is going to come into play, I would think, or maybe I'm wrong.
So you would see in a report something like that the committee feels that a significant issue...
No. No one's talking about a report here, okay? We're talking about what are the items listed here, and we want to change them from 4 to 1 item to vote on. That's, I think, what we're talking about.
Right.
Let me just finish for a second, okay?
Well, I'd just like to inject one other thing, okay? You're supposed to be a facilitator, okay? You're not supposed to be standing here arguing to maintain the list that you came up with in part with Mike. And if that's how we're going from here, then I'd like to suggest that Mike get up and lead the group, and you sit down and be a facilitator.
No, that's not what I'm trying to do. What
Well,
trying
I'm
to
sorry,
do-
you've been arguing for what appears to be your position on what these items should be. And I don't think that that's appropriate in this setting as a facilitator.
This is not my position on what these things should be. What I was saying was, what I hear is freeze salaries, this, and this are all one thing.
Right, not in a report, in what we vote on.
Well, that's fine.
Okay, that's what we're
just
saying.
what we're voting on tonight is a rough structure for a report, and it's the only reason I refer to a report. So what I hear you saying is these.
Do we want to vote as a committee?
That's why I put the A here, and I think you mentioned engaging employees could be a reasonable subset of that as a process.
And that's just my thought. I'm not,
But that was
it's
the
up
point
to
you were making, right?
That's exactly the point I'm making, because if, for instance, let's say everybody has a priority to do furloughs,
Right.
and all those other things don't make it on the list. I mean, if you want to look at salaries or restructure and stuff like that, what happens if it says furloughs is a priority, but also engaging employees in identifying cost reduction scenarios? Are we going to then say, okay, let them be part of deciding whether or not to do those furloughs and stuff like that? So I just want to make sure we can be as clear as possible,
Right.
as clear as possible up front.
Excuse me, Monica Stigler. I have a couple of points of clarification. I'm reading this engage employees in identifying cost reduction scenarios possibly as two different things. I think throughout our meetings we've heard from department heads saying that they've talked to their employees about how to reduce cost, operation cost for their department, and so they've been engaging in that process to cut the bottom line in their department. But it now seems like that could also mean engaging employees in deciding how to reduce their compensation. So I just want to be clear that those are two different things and two different ways to think about what that actually means. I also would like to say that these particular suggestions on how to reduce employee compensation are not the same. I've gone through a furlough, which is very different than cutting a bonus or a longevity pay, or it's also very different than cutting or reducing your salary altogether by a certain percentage, whereas a furlough only lasts for so long. So I think we have to be clear here that these are very different types of salary reductions, and freezing salaries is not reducing salaries. So we need to be clear on that as well. So if you're wanting to talk about this and not wasting your vote trying to decide which way is the best way to go, and what you're really saying is let's have a broad category of engaging employees about how they may want to reduce their compensation, and then grouping those into that subheading, that's the way that we can move forward without having to decide which one of those measures is best and lump them all together. So I just wanted to be clear to point out that these are very different ways to reduce salaries or to freeze the salary. It's not the same thing. And that question at the top of number 3, or the statement at the top of number 3 there, can be viewed two completely different ways.
Howard Broadbeck. Okay, here's the only thing I'm suggesting. The only thing I'm suggesting is we take the 4 reduce employee compensation items, there's 4 of them, and we consider that as one item with a list, similarly to how it was done with selling assets or selling naming rights where there was a list. And I believe that that's appropriate for more than one reason, but a primary reason is I'm not an HR person, okay, and I don't know whether furloughs, pay reduction, longevity pay, or I can't read the last one, would be the most appropriate thing to do. But I think putting them under one item and saying here's 4 or 5 suggestions, that's about as specific as I want to get. I mean, we're not going to be here to tell the city how to run their business on a day-to-day basis. So I guess with that, I'd like to propose, if I can do this, I'd like to propose that we vote. My proposal is that we take those 4 items and we put them under one item with a list of the 4 things associated with it, and I think that's well, I'm just saying, I think we should vote on that. So I guess I would move that we vote on assembling those 4 items into one group.
I'll second that motion.
Motion second.
I agree,
comments.
because the 4 there seem to be a contradiction to page 1. Freezing salaries.
Can't hear you, Al.
On page 1, it says freeze salaries. And on page 2, it says pay reduction. You can't have something frozen and reduced.
Well, these are not meant to,
I would not include the first one. I eliminate that first one. And I would stay only with those 4. That's the point.
okay, we have a motion and a second. Comments, please.
Marvin Fair. I've got a question because there are different monetary factors associated with each one of those steps. For example, with the furloughs, I was the one who crafted that, and it ended up on top. I'm not saying that that's my first priority, but I basically computed that we're saving almost $500,000 on that. The same thing with the health insurance, which I also crafted. That's $500,000 as well. So that's $1 million right there, and we're only supposed to save $1.6 million, which doesn't leave us much room to do other things. My suggestion is to address all the other things first and leave any adjustment to employee salaries last, and see where we come up with savings.
We have a motion and a second on that. Any further discussion on the motion is that we group all 5 of those into one.
No,
item.
it was 4.
Just the 4. Keep the
Just these 4, okay. Those 4 items into one item, and have that be reduce employee compensation, and it can have subsets of relatively general statements about furlough, pay reduction, longevity, health insurance, examine these possibilities.
If we just say employee compensation and have bullet points underneath it, we could put it all into one category, and then we can discuss each one individually if we wish, and decide if we
That's exactly what I'm suggesting.
Okay. Anybody else want? We have motion second. Any more comments?
It's Greg Hansen. You could even go further if you want to just call it employee compensation and employee benefits if anybody has a problem with it. If health insurance or something like that is falling under a different category. If it's broader, to let the city hack it out on where they want to go. Just a suggestion.
Can we, I think that suggestion is more terminology than anything. Does anybody have any problem with adding that? It simply is an extra descriptive point. The point was, I don't know that it changes anything other than add a slash benefits, right? Which it's a subset of compensation. You just want to be a little more specific. Is that acceptable? That's simple without going through a vote? Because we'll vote on the big issue and the point that the motion that Howard made. But is that small change acceptable, folks?
Sure.
Versus benefits?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't change anything in any data in any way. Okay. Yes, ma'am. You were.
Well, are we now just are we going to vote on this being one, or what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Where are you, Parrish? You back there? Okay.
Damn it, do it.
You tell me when you're ready. Wave a hand. It's like a puppet show. Oh, you know what? Just put a yes or no. Is that okay? We don't need to write out the whole question. We'll state the question. The question is, shall we group these 4 into one? We're going to call it employee compensation benefits. These will be subsets of it that you can discuss more specifically if you choose to.
Yeah, it's reduce employee compensation.
Yeah, reduce.
Reduce employee compensation. Yes, okay, reduce employee compensation. Pardon, I'm sorry.
Just employee compensation, benefits, all these others would be categories underneath that would be discussed.
You're going to need to use that.
Right.
I'm sorry. I think that once we get the category we want, each one would be an individual bullet underneath, and we would discuss each one of those and decide whether we should keep it or not. That's my feeling about how we should do it.
Okay. So the motion in the second, for the item on the table is these four grouped under reduced employee compensation / benefits with comments that you've heard. And all those in favor, I'm sorry, what did we press? 1 for yes? 1 for yes, 2 for no.
So 1 is to combine, yes.
Yes, 1 is a combined, 2 is no. Don't combine. Now. Okay, we'll do it again. Push harder. We got 15 out of 17.
Go down. Any marks instead? You say what? Okay.
You have to hit a reset button before? Pardon me? 17-0, okay. Here we go. It was here.
So
88% yes, I think I saw it. 88% yes, 12% no. So when you cast your ballot, you might note this, well, note this on yours, and it'll be the same as this we hand out, that this is one single item. With these, and it'll be listed as if these are subsets, dot points under it. And that makes your point moot given the vote. Okay, going down the list. Training, increased training other than mandated by law. That's pretty clear, unless you have questions.
Nick, I do. This is Bill Stipp. There's a lot of training that takes place that doesn't cost the city any money, that even though it's not required by law, is certainly absolutely required, particularly in public safety. So I think a topic that says freeze training other than mandated by law basically is a mandate from us that says thou shalt not train.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And I honestly think that's a problem. If we want to tell particularly our public safety folks, hey, police officers, don't worry about qualifying with a weapon. Hey, firefighters, don't worry about becoming and maintaining proficiency, even though that stuff isn't required by law because our state is dragging behind in that, I think is going to be an issue. So we may want to look at rephrasing that or getting specifically at the whoever floated that to get what it is you're looking for.
Yeah, Howard Broadbeck, I would agree with what Bill said. And there are two things, not just citizen. I wrote notes for myself that citizen protection would be one thing that you'd add to that, and the other one might be any capital project with a revenue payback of X, right? So if it has a 1 year, I'll say 1 year as a start. But if you had a significant revenue payback or it was for citizen protection, I think that would be added to required by law, because I think then we have a much better chance of it being considered seriously.
Comments on that?
I don't understand. Gary Gilzer, I don't understand how payback reflects in citizen training. I mean, you know, that any economic analysis can be done however you want to structure the numbers, and I think I just can't buy that one. I'm sorry.
Other comments?
Monica Stickler, was the essence of this suggestion to reduce the amount of money the city is spending on training? Because if that's the case, then I think that we can just restructure the question.
How would you?
Mike Kiak, based on the analysis that I did, that's the intent.
It wasn't about training, it's about money.
Right.
Yeah, this is Bill Stipp. I know every city department has a line item that's called training, and it's been significantly reduced over the years, but maybe that is where we want to go with this, is to have the specific line item of training examined for appropriateness for each department rather than eliminating. Is that?
Yeah, my key recommendation would be maybe freeze training expense other than mandated by law. If there is no expense for the item, then...
Well, I get to the public safety, again, that's...
Well, maybe have we got a combination of two thoughts, and one is, that costs money, and the other is accept public safety and security being the exception.
Mike Kiak sounds good to me.
So it's something like this, folks, and we'll ask you if you concur with it. Is it freeze training with paid training? Give a better word. Sounds like. Well, what the notion is, free paid training other than mandated by law or to provide public safety.
Ed Smith, if we just reworded it outside training, because that's usually when you have to pay for training is when outside people come in for it. If we just put it in freeze outside training unless it's mandated by law, would that clarify it for everybody?
I think the paid part, it gets a little vague. Perhaps, does it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's issues in there. Yeah, the whole mandated by law piece where it gets sticky for us is the state of Arizona really doesn't require a whole lot of anything when it comes to that. It's just not on the books. But common sense, best practices says that we should expect certain members of the employee population to maintain proficiency in their employment.
And that wouldn't counter Edwin's position, right? Because then the training that's done inside, it doesn't cost any money, is still not restricted by this.
Right.
And the language that I have up here to see if you like it, freeze paid training other than mandated by law or public safety. This is just for your voting. We'll wordsmith better when we give you a draft back. But that's so you'll know what you're voting on. Let's not do paid training, except we know we're going to do it for public safety. But other than that, high scrutinization of the budget line is what you're saying then.
Yeah. So look at all training, all paid trainings with the exception of public safety.
Public safety, right.
Dick,
Yes, sir.
the way I took my notes here, I just said training other than mandated by law, examine for appropriateness on an individual basis.
Okay. That's a little different.
A little tighter, it works.
Others comment on that. Wordsmithing now, but I don't want to suggest a wordsmithing that doesn't work for you to clearly understand what you're voting on.
I think that could be enough, and then all the initial after the vote and stuff. I mean, I think, or I have a clear kind of idea of what we're talking about, and then it can be hammered out when we make the bullets and do the write-up and stuff like that.
Which won't lose that point. Charles Maynard, do you suggest that we change the language to what he's saying? Would you read that again, please? Maybe, thank you.
Training other than mandated by law, examine for appropriateness on an individual basis.
Which doesn't put in there the exclusion of public safety, but similar kind of, yes, sir.
The other thing I worry about is appropriateness. Appropriateness by whom? I'm sorry, Barry Hamp. As judged by whom? I like the specifics when we talk about the protective services.
Unless I hear otherwise, I'm kind of sensing that you're satisfied with this language.
Mike, does not kind of water down what you were saying?
Yeah, it almost seems like we're going backwards. And so, I mean, who's to make that judgment? I think if the CBC has a specific recommendation, I think we should be as specific as we want to be. And it's not a mandate. The city's not legally obligated to follow exactly what we said. But I want to, I guess I'd like to think that we're as clear as we can be relative to what the wishes of the citizens of Goodyear.
Is anybody, are you okay with this the way it is here, and we can get into more discussion later on? Cut operation.
Dick, could you reread that?
This is freeze paid training other than mandated by law or for public safety. The next one is cut operation costs. This was a very broad one because there's a lot of things that lumped into that.
Right.
So these were just small examples: paperless, postage-free, cut print edition, mailing the InFocus. There was a lot of comment on the InFocus.
Scott Mikes, when I looked at this, I saw also, I mean, as far as operation costs, I saw the reduced service level of bulk pickup. Is there any way we can just kind of put / bulk pickup as well? I mean, since we're looking at some of those operating
This is my
costs
key.
for that.
Bulk pickup was identified as a separate one. What you're seeing here is specifically associated with publication of materials by the city.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Thank you. Good.
So is that okay, folks? Any questions? Get clarity on that? Support economic development for new revenue. This was on the revenue side. And it came from, again, a number of people put it in different ways that could be part of the way out of the problem.
This Bill Stibb, I wasn't here last week. I apologize for not participating in that discussion, but why are revenue items being ranked?
Say that again?
Why are revenue items being ranked at all? Wouldn't any revenue generation be a good thing? That who could be opposed to anything that generates revenue? So why are we voting on that?
This is Mike Kiek.
Like a tax increase?
Well, I'm looking at these. I think like bulk trash away from the InFocus, I think you can separate a tax increase, but if you look at support economic development, cost recovery, community fees, naming rights, some of those are pretty generic, and they're all revenue.
This is Mike Kiek, but when I was looking through the data, correct me, but what I would see is in some of the write-ups, the way someone phrased it one way, you could read it like it was a cost reduction measure. You could read it another way, or at least in part, as a revenue generation. So the problem I had trying to make sure that I was representing the thoughts of the committee was that I got to the point where I really couldn't differentiate one from a cost savings or a revenue generation. I mean, theoretically, you could argue all of them in some degree are both. And so, I mean, it's going to cost you some amount of money to figure out how to reduce employee benefits. Okay, so do you have to spend money to make money? That's where I started kind of getting wrapped around the axle, that I thought it was better just to put it up as a recommendation and let the committee identify with it as a recommendation, and how we end up wording it, the sub-bullets, whether we intend it to be more of a cost reduction or intend for more of a revenue generation, that would be part of the fleshing out the language to go with the detail behind it.
Okay, and I guess I get some of that. I'm just looking at these. We've got 3 of them that all say consider new fees, and then we list them. Kind of in the same idea with the reduced employee compensation. Maybe we ought to be considering lumping some of those together. Support economic development for new revenue seems pretty straightforward to me, though.
Yeah, Howard Broadbeck. I assume we're going to talk about this later, but I know Gary made, one of the things you missed last week, Gary made the suggestion, which I thought we had agreed to do, that we were going to vote separately on the revenues versus the cost reductions, and there were different colored tabs.
Right, that's what we gave, yeah. We gave you 2 extra tabs to use that way.
Right. Now, I thought I heard you say you've changed that, but I'm waiting till when we get to that point to question why that happened, but that was something else that was last week that Gary suggested.
Thank you.
You know, folks, we're banging these things. Everybody gets 8 votes. Everybody gets 2 primary votes. Everybody gets 2 revenue enhancement votes. And everybody gets 4, I think these are really important votes. And if we beat this up for another 2 hours, then we're going to all vote, and then we're going to try to beat it up again. I really think that we should try to get through these things as quickly as possible. We've lumped 4 together as reducing employee compensation. A lot of people believe that. There's many ways of doing that. But, you know, we're going to get back into the nitty-gritty of this once it all shakes out. And I think we need to try to move this along versus everybody have each individual item. As the facilitator and as Mike Kiek have said, none of this is going to be tossed out of the report. These are broad, general categories, and we're starting to fight about the wordsmithing, which will go on till midnight if we allow it.
Howard Broadbeck, and I completely agree with Gary. We should get through this as rapidly as possible, but I still believe this is a valuable exercise, and it'll save us time in the long run, because if people vote for things, I mean, everybody had a week now to go home and look at these and think about what they've heard in 9 weeks, and it's not an easy thing to do. And I think it's valuable that if Bill has an issue with one thing he wants to understand better, maybe that's the one he wants to put a red dot next to, then I think it's valuable, because I think it's going to save us a lot of time going forward. But yeah, nobody wants to be here till midnight, and we should do it as quickly as possible. There's no doubt about that.
I agree also, Joan Shield, but I believe the time that we take on the front end will save us on the back end.
Okay, anybody else want to comment on this? Support economic development may, in fact, as we go on, have other subsets, but that stands as, like, this is mostly, I think, the Economic Development Department concept of work that's done to outreach into the business community. Restructure current debt. This is Larry's plan, and this is Larry's plan plus the most recent addendum to it, which we've all seen. But rather than try to go through it all right here, we would certainly put it in the draft report, but it's something there was a great deal of support for from you, and that's why we both put that on the list. It was the restructuring of debt and the usage of different pots to restructure that debt.
Joan Shield, I like the statement of restructure current debt, but I'd like to remove Larry's plan and not limit it.
This doesn't limit it. That's kind of an example. So I can...
But I can see where it could be limited to that, and I just would like that removed.
For purposes of... Mike Kiak, for purposes of voting, is that what you're saying?
Right.
Okay.
Sorry, Larry.
Anybody have any problem with that? Doesn't change what you're voting on. Consider new fees. I got a lot of them.
Can we lump those 3 together?
I don't see any reason why not, since we're going to deal with them individually when we get to that point.
Like we did with the reduced compensation.
Do we need to vote on that, anybody?
So this is one thing. You got that picture in your mind, unless you don't want it that way. What do you think?
Any objection?
We don't need to vote on that, do we? Tell me if there's a problem. So that's false alarm, photo enforcement. Consider policy for cost recovery on many services. This came out as a number of different ways. It included parks and recreation. It was the ballpark. It was rental of community facilities, a whole number of different things that related to that. Okay. Then we move over to page 3. Billing frequency of utilities quarterly. This one was one, I think, Marvin, did you present that?
Yes, I did.
And there was a great deal of support for that position. And so that's specific. Even though it's revenue producer, it's a very specific item to think there's merit to having.
Oh,
It amounted to a $31,000 savings.
Yeah,
Howard. Any discussion on that?
No, not on that. Yeah, Howard, I think you skipped one, and to gauge employees. I don't think we actually went over that one yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. I circled that when we were talking about the employee compensation. Let's go back to that then. Okay. This was the point that was made by Evelyn and others that engaged in play. Let them help figure out how to get out of it.
I think going on what Monica said earlier, I think that there's two very distinct subcategories of that. One is in operational cost reductions. The other one is the employees should absolutely be part of the compensation reduction part. And I don't know if we need to list that twice, if it's that important to separate them, or how we feel about that.
I think that I would suggest that you could find both of those under there, an operational and a compensation subset.
And I'm okay with that.
We're all right with that, rather than have two separate and distinct ones?
Or you could just include the words, including employee compensation on that item, and that would pretty much cover it.
There you go.
Yes, sir.
I would suggest also, if we're going to reduce or suggest reducing employee compensation, when we have that discussion, we just put in there that they should engage the employees in that discussion as part of that, if they're going to go that route.
So I think that this one may team up with this one if there's enough interest in both of them, right? When you vote. So they're separate and distinct right now. But if there's a level of interest, then when this occurs, there's an expectation this would occur.
That was my thought in the beginning.
Okay. We bulk pickup. Reduced service, a bulk pickup. That seemed like to most everybody something that they were attracted to. Okay. Sell naming rights. And I know this is an economic development one, but this was such a big and unusual one for Goodyear that it stood out alone. Sell naming rights from seats to venues. Remember that discussion?
Somebody needs to explain that one to me.
This was naming rights. It was. I think when Howard said that Gary would buy his name on the back of a seat in council chambers. Or
No, Gary said he would.
Gary said.
I thought it was the men's room.
But he mentioned buying seats at the ballpark.
Names on the back of the seats in ballparks. It's all sorts of.
Okay. I didn't know that one actually made it to the list.
Well, it made it to the list because.
Yeah, this is Mike Kiak. I actually found multiple references through the course of the material where it ranged from potentially selling a park to a corporation or something like that, so that it, the Waste Management Park or something like that. So there were numerous references in the material. I mean, we joked about the ballpark seat, or the city council seat, but there were numerous references in the material that I came across.
And for me, that part of it makes total sense. It was the seat thing that's what kind of threw me for a loop. I hate to be overly simple,
seats
but
to venues, from very small
There was
seats
a
to the
spectrum.
whole ballpark. Billboards along major right-of-way. This was also a very strong point. Anybody have questions or comments on that? Suspend capital projects unless required by law. Now, just gauging, yes.
This is one I thought that Bill was referring to, and that's why I said payback as well as citizen protection. I would think this one needs to be modified similarly, at least to the one that Bill suggested.
For the revenue side of it, right? For public safety or revenue production?
Yes. Yeah.
That seems to be missing from that. Are you folks okay with that? Is anybody not okay with that? So, public safety and...
Go ahead.
Well, if you're replacing something that's broken and you're saving dollars, I mean, it's the same as revenue generation if you're reducing costs.
Yeah, and that to me is where the payback thing comes in. So in other words, if you're investing in capital that has a payback of a certain minimum term, or you're investing in capital whose revenues will pay it back within a certain term, I agree with Larry. Either one of those should be doable. But I think where council is going to have the issue is, what's the payback period, right? If it's 6 years, then to me that's way too long. If it's 1 year, that might be way too short. So there's somewhere in between, because when you spend capital, you're spending the taxpayers' money, and we don't have that money to spend right now. So to me, it's got to be a fairly low payback. It's got to be a much lower payback period going forward, at least for some period of time, than it has been in the past. And that's where we were asking questions of the guy here was talking about, what was it, the parking lot, right? That going forward would be a much different decision than it has been in the past.
Okay.
Larry Price. There could be some capital projects that never pay back, but they reduce, I mean, the road has holes in it. You can't get across the road with your public safety equipment, your vehicles, so you need to repair the road. That could be a, oh, you added public safety?
Okay. How do we address the capital projects that are paid for? I mean, theoretically, it's all paid for with citizen dollars, but there are certain accounts in the way that the accounting is set up that they can only be used for capital projects. So we're going to create a fund that's going to be very cash flush that we are saying you can't spend it.
That's correct. The way the inputs came in from the way they were written and the way I evaluated them, people are saying don't scratch them, don't get rid of them. The concept is suspend them, okay? Don't commit to the expenditure of that particular project this year. You might want to do the project, but it may not be until next year, and you're in a better position financially overall. So the concept was not delete or reprioritize or throw out. It was consistently came across as suspend or hold on the projects unless they were absolutely necessary. That's the way the input came in.
Okay, so really what we're talking about then is suspend capital projects unless for public safety or revenue recovery or savings, and scratching the required by law? Is that what that's what I'd like to propose, and we just say it like that. That's my motion. Can I get a second?
Is that okay, folks? I mean, that's a fairly simple language change, because I think presumed in this whole thing is if it's required by law, we're going to do it.
Right.
It's just a given, so there's not an opt-out. Be okay if I suspend capital projects except for public safety where there's a revenue recovery or a savings that potentially would be within a time frame that you might flesh out a little bit. You so okay with taking required by law? Anybody opposed to taking required by law out? It's implied anyway. It goes with the territory. No new debt, 2010, 2011.
Hello?
That isn't. Is somebody on the phone?
Yeah, it's Charles.
Charles.
I couldn't hear it.
Charles.
Oh.
I have good ears.
Charles, you heard it?
Charles Rutherford?
Yes.
Hello? Charles. Yeah, it's Charles. Rodnick.
You're on live.
Yeah.
Can you hear?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, good. If you just speak loudly when you want us to listen to you, and we'll hush up and let you talk. Is there anything you need to say at this point that we've drowned you out on?
I just wasn't sure how I'd go about voting on stuff. I'm stuck down here at the Suns the next 2 Wednesdays. So.
Well, if you can stay on the line, in a few minutes we'll get to the voting point of this. And if you have your sheet there that has all the items listed on it, someone will take the phone and write down the items that you have as your priority.
I have some of the information. I don't have a computer in front of me though. I'm kind of like stuck with the security of the Sun.
Are you in a place where someone could fax something to you?
Excuse me?
Are you at a place where someone could fax something to you?
No, I'm not.
Okay. This may be difficult for us to do.
Almost on the bench for the Suns.
Yeah, okay. I think it's going to be very difficult for us to do that.
Suns Arena.
Stay with us if you have any questions, but I think we're going to have some difficulty in you actually casting your vote. The only way we could do it is someone read them off to you one by one, but then you'd have to see them all in context with each other. I think that might be quite difficult. But if you want to hang in, you might feel differently about it and can.
Can he hold on the phone, or do we need to call him back when we're ready to vote? Because he is working.
I understand. I understand. You can call back at any time you want to if you have to go and do something. But I think the process is going to be difficult.
I'll do that.
Okay.
Can I call him when we get ready to vote?
Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm just saying I'm doing my best to be a part of this, you know.
I understand. I very much appreciate that. Is there a place we can call you to let you know we're getting ready to do the vote?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, give us a
Someone could do
number.
That would be very helpful.
Would you give us a number?
Joan has my phone number, Joan Shields.
Okay. Okay, we'll call you then when we're ready to start the vote.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. We can do that, but I'm not sure there's a way to get my head around how to make that a legitimate vote like what we're doing here today. So we'll have to think about that. No new debt in 2010, 2011.
Dick,
Yes, sir.
the restructured debt, the idea behind that is to issue new GO bonds and pay off old excise tax bonds. So if when you say, or when it said no new debt, if that accepts that, it's okay.
This is Mike Eck. That's the way I read the data, is that was a separate item independent of whether or not there was new debt acquired as a result of restructuring.
And any restructuring old debt is not that. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on that? How about a just rainy day fund policy to help with the recession? You remember that it seemed to be large. Is it 4 months? What's it? 4 months, which now is about 16 million. Eliminate frozen positions. Any questions?
How does that save money if the positions are already frozen and they're not being budgeted for?
Speak those who saw that as a point.
I think that's a non-issue. As long as it's not funded, they can't put anybody in the position. If the economy changes and we need more people, then they don't have to go through the process of trying to establish a position again.
I beg to differ. If a position is authorized, it stays on the books. And Gary Gelser, if a position is authorized, it remains on the books. It's considered either a frozen position or a non-filled position. But at this point in time, the city has 585 authorized positions based on budget, based on policy, based on anything else. If you eliminate these positions, then new justification has to come to put the position into effect. Basically, what we're talking about is zero-based budgeting. And if you want to vote for it, vote for it. If you don't want to vote for it, don't vote for
I
it.
think that framing is important, because if it were not, so there's two sides of the question. One is the elimination of frozen positions, in part because the hurdle to get the position back is a little higher than if it's sitting there frozen, right?
This is Mike Eck. That's the way the data came across to me that I evaluated.
Correct. So it essentially will cost us more money in man-hours to get the position back that we've already gone through the process of justifying for. So in essence, this is not only not a cost saving, it's actually going to cost us more in the long run.
Unless someone presumes that in bringing back those positions, some of them may not pass through the fashion.
They've already passed through City Council once.
Understand. I'm just
So-
making sure all sides are laying out there. Well, you understand it, whether you're for or against it, you got a clear picture of what that is, right, folks? Is that right in your way? Consider service provision to other jurisdictions. Police and fire were discussed, or I think fire was discussed, and maybe police to a degree. But this was a fairly broad item. It had some specifics in it, Mike, as I recall, that, it's just what can we sell next door.
The write-up came across as not just police and fire. It's anything and anything. The city has a capability that if that can be a benefit to another city who's got financial problems, then fine. The city basically sells its capabilities or services to the highest bidder. Simple as that.
Win-win kind of thing. Raise property tax to 1.80 to raise revenue. The 1.80 was recommended by the committee a few years ago. Council dropped it down to 160. Before I went back through my old notes, and I thought somewhere along the line that is precluded by the current, that it's not something they could do if they wanted to, but I might be wrong. Help me with that. A head nod or one of these, or it's just that they can't do. I wouldn't want to suggest something to them they absolutely can't do. Can you help me with that?
The primary property tax levy is limited, that they cannot increase. And the discussion I heard, and it may already be up in another category, I heard a discussion linked to the debt element.
That's different. I'm thinking just this one, just this, nothing else.
Just this one, the primary property tax rate that would benefit the general fund cannot be increased by increasing that rate.
Okay, now the person that recommended that or people, were you thinking primary? So, yes, sir.
Howard Broadbeck, what I think of in this is when we went around the table and talked about this, the sense I got from this was that it's okay for the city to raise rates so that people's property tax doesn't fall, so that the property tax revenue to the city doesn't fall. I don't know if that means primary or secondary.
I think that's primarily secondary voter-approved bonds, which they must feed the bonds, so the rate goes up automatically. It's not a council choice, is it? Unless they choose to take general fund revenues?
Unless they choose to
take general fund revenues. So, yeah. Is there another way to word that that's less specific, that gets perhaps at the point that's Howard's made, that use the property tax
the way you just said it
as an instrument?
Just you should add the word rate after tax in there. And what comes to mind when I see something like this is council has a self-imposed combined property tax limit of $1.60. So when I first saw that, that's what I thought this said. Well, go ahead, and that combined self-imposed property tax limit of $1.60 can raise to $1.80, because going back to the committee several years ago, that was on the table, but it came in at $1.60. Okay. So it's a combined rate. Council doesn't set rates. Council adopts levies, and the rates are set depending on the assessed value at the county level.
So it's combined rate, primary, secondary?
Yes. That's what their self-imposed policy says now, that the combined rate should not exceed $1.60. And that's what they've been doing for the last 5 years or so.
Yes, sir.
Would this wordsmith capture it? If we changed it to, using what you just said partly, is raise property tax rate to maintain revenue at current levels. Would that capture it? And then you basically leave it up to city council to determine what's the appropriate way to address that.
It's not that simple.
Okay. So what
yes,
sir.
There are I'm going to get into this discussion about Arizona's property tax system, and I don't know if, but you almost have to hear it to understand why you can't do what you just said. Cities, since 1980, their primary property tax levy can only be so much, and basically if there's no new growth, it's 2% greater than it was the year before. And the property tax rate of this primary levy is set by the property tax assessed value. In addition to the primary, there is a secondary levy and rate. Secondary levy can only be imposed if the voters have approved general obligation bonds and the city has sold the general obligation bonds, then they can levy a secondary levy, tax revenues, and then that rate is determined by the secondary assessed value, which is a much higher assessed value, it is a higher assessed value. So you have a two-tier system in the state of Arizona, maybe the only state in the nation has it, but it's the combined rate. The only thing the city can do with the primary property tax levy is to decide not to levy the maximum. They can't go above the maximum. They're told what that is every year, every February or so. They get a letter from the county says, this is your maximum primary property tax levy next year. This is your assessed value, so this is the rate. Now, if the city has outstanding bonds, they can levy any amount they want to satisfy the bonds. There's no legal limit on the rate or the levy other than voter approval, and you can't exceed 6 or 20% of the assessed value to be GO and bonded debt.
And you're saying they're already at the state maximum.
They have been doing $1.60 is the self-imposed rate. If the self-imposed rate was not there, then it could be higher or lower depending on how much they want to support the water and sewer system GO debt.
Larry, so that gets at the question. If they raise from 160 to 180 or some other number, do they give themselves the room necessary to apply the annual increase as a matter of course?
Well, what's going to happen, probably what can happen in 2 years from now, that if they want to levy their primary property tax rate and pay their general fund GO, the rate's going to be greater than $1.80 because the assessed value of the city is crashing. And so if the committee says limit it to $1.80 and council really believe that, then they would either, one, not levy the maximum primary property tax levy, or they would not levy for their debt service for GO and use some other revenue source, which doesn't make a lot of sense either. So I'm not sure what we're trying to get at with this rate, because it's not as simple as we'd like to say, just limit the rate.
Well,
because
if you took the rate out of there, if you took the rate out of there, what would it be helpful for the council to do if this body wanted them to do it, that would allow them the flexibility when those kinds of issues come forward to make sure that the burden is upon the property tax and not upon the general fund, which is part of what I think this intention is.
It depends on what you're trying to do. Are you trying to protect revenues, or are you trying to limit rates? And if you're trying to protect revenues, then you don't even want to talk about rate. You want to say levy the maximum primary property tax levy every year.
Okay, that's what I'm.
But that's different from the rate.
You're the ones that put rate in the first place.
No, well, because it says raise property tax at $1.80, that doesn't make sense.
So we're at a point where there's something that could have a value, at least as a recommendation, is to have a policy to raise the maximum levy.
Well, I think they're doing that now. They are doing the maximum because several years ago they didn't, and they lost $1.5 million a year by not doing it.
So they're now doing that as a matter of course.
I think they are.
Well, wait a
Just say what you just said again so he can write it down and we can all see it.
But I don't know what to say because I don't know what the committee wants to do.
The idea is to maintain the revenue.
If it was up to me, it wouldn't be on the sheet.
Well,
It doesn't make sense.
Larry Lang expressed a lot of concern about revenues dropping on property tax. Right. And so, at least for me, and I think it was for a lot of the people on the committee, the idea was, well, if there was one tax that we'd say would be fair, it would be one that allowed the homeowner, the property owner, to pay an equal dollar amount to what they've been paying. Because as values go down, tax bills are going to go down, and that's going to push the city even harder than where they are today. So it was the idea of maintaining property tax revenues, not rates.
Then you should say the city should levy the maximum primary property tax levy.
So what I've written here is assess the maximum primary tax levy every year. That's the kind of the bottom line, I think, of it. And ignore the 160 limitation.
Dick, could we ask Larry Price? No, wait, Larry Lang. God, I get the two Larrys mixed up.
Larry Lang.
If we are levying the maximum primary property tax at this point in time, is there any leeway? Are we allowed to raise the secondary property tax so that we can maximize or retain the same amount of revenues that we've had in the past from both the combined property taxes? And that's really the question that we're trying to ascertain, whether we can legally do this and whether we have the assessed valuation, and then whether council wants to do it.
So it's raising the secondary to a level based on previous approval that would then offset some of the general fund. I don't think that can be done, but Larry, am I right? That's Larry Price. Keep it at the table for the moment. Is that right?
Say the question again.
Well, the question was, what if the council, there's a limit on what they can do with primary. It's a little max every year.
The council has a combined, the council deals, the primary and secondary are a combined rate.
Right.
And they deal it with, and they have basically finessed the prime rate and the secondary rate so that the combined rate comes in at $1.60. And previous recommendations have been that the combined rate be targeted at $1.80. Well, that was when assessed valuation was moving in a positive direction versus moving in a negative direction. If what I'm asking is, if we are using the primary, if we are using the primary taxes at the maximum rate, is there any room in the secondary rate to allow us to continue to keep the same revenue, total dollars that we've had, and the rate may go up? And basically the secondary rate is based on valuation, and do we have the capacity to do that? So that's what I'm asking before we sit there and try to wordsmith this into something else.
I understand. Isn't that a little bit of what your proposal is, Larry?
Well, there's some other moving pieces that go into all of this.
But it is a little piece of it, is the...
But sorry. This is Mike Yick. There were enough inputs independent of the debt restructure that people specifically identified that as a standalone item. And that's why I wrote it down.
If this was as simple as assess the maximum levy each year, that gets us to first base, doesn't it?
I mean, the way the write-up read to me, it was about protecting revenue.
Yeah, okay. Pardon me?
Is it if we don't know what we're totally voting on,
No, this is
why don't we take it off?
absolutely okay. This statement, we're just seeing if there were other nuances to it that would add to it. So can we leave that here just the way it's reworded with what Larry said? Assess the maximum primary tax levy every year. Maybe there's a little bit more to that, huh?
Yeah, in order to maintain current revenues, because what you don't want this to say is, well, as property values start to go up, just keep keep it at the same. Then you've opened up a jar of honey.
Yeah.
But what happens when the values go up, the rate goes down for the primary. That's historically what it's been doing. Now it's going to reverse that because the assessed value is going down, the rate will go up, because the levy is going to go up at least 2% every year.
And that caveat that you put in there gives them the flexibility if the AV goes up to alter that on an annual basis.
That's what the intent. Sorry, Mike Yick. That's the intent that I read in the write-ups that I've reviewed.
To get over this, over the financial crisis, and then the future would be different.
Again, it was about protecting revenue.
Yes. Yes. Oh, consider the sale of city assets. Now, one of the little examples was the skate park, but in general, there was a question: does the city have assets that it doesn't need, and should it sell them? Does it have assets that if it sold them, the system would run better in privatized hands? Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you've listed the one, and I assume we'll list others, but the one that stands out to me that's not here is this Arizona tourism future payment as a possible, because I think that might be a lot of money. That's all. And whether we have it in there or not isn't that important. I'm just pointing it out that I think that's the one that has to be, at least in the write-up, it should be in there.
Correct. Again, it's Mike Kiek. I tried to put at least one example in so that I could kind of use it to anchor people's thinking about when we said, gee, there were city assets that we identified during the course of our discussion that could be considered. Now, I've just tried to put one example just to be as a thought jogger, but not to say that's the definitive list.
Yes, sir.
Dick, I don't know if the city charter addressed it or not, but there used to be a statutory authority on if you wanted to sell an asset that had a certain value, you had to go to an election and get voter approval to do that. So I don't know if the city charter eliminated that necessity. I don't know, but it may take an election. The threshold used to be as low as 100,000. So.
Joan, did you have a comment?
Well, I thought the skate park was part of a park, and I didn't know that it could be segregated out and be sold.
It's not uncommon to lease out or privatize portions of parks.
Okay.
It'd be a little more difficult to sell, I think, but privatization is not uncommon. Next one, Right Side City Department. Now, this was certainly in the top few because of the number of times that word was used, but we didn't list all of the suggested components of different departments. It became the same kind of statement for more or less look at everything, get it down to the right size through examining staffing and expenses. Bill?
Trying to find it, but there's no way on the planet I'm going to find it in this 4 inches of paper. One of the documents that was produced, and I think, Howard, you were the one that summarized the meeting like 3 or 4 weeks ago. I thought there was some indication in there that the committee discussion that night was looking to exclude public safety or something else from this right sizing. Is that?
I saw some write-ups that said that, but I also saw write-ups that did not include that. In other words, they were reduced to the police department. So there's across the board, and as was mentioned, this one item had the highest number of comments from us as a committee. And some people agreed with each other, some people conflicted with each other, but the common denominator was the committee members seemed to have this consensus that something needed to be looked at relative to right sizing. There was also different approaches described in terms of how you go about doing that, and there was different departments mentioned relative to who should be right sized. The common theme, though, as far as what I tried to pull out, was that the committee was trying to say, gee, the city needs to look at right sizing, how it's set up.
Okay, and I remember all of that part, and I thought all of that came out, and then there was a verbal discussion among the committee, which Howard summarized and sent. Do you have that document?
This 12 items that people seem to...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't find mine.
The
But
one on here says, I think what you're saying something about a department?
what's the date on that one? Maybe I can...
This is, well, it was posted March 25th.
There was a statement on that said, someone said, but don't touch public safety, and I think it was fire. Or was it public safety? But there were other points going the other way. I mean, it was...
Correct. Oh, the first item on the list is no police or fire cuts.
That's the one I'm talking about. Okay.
This was the summary of our roundtable discussion.
Correct. And that's what I'm trying to figure out is when did that summary, that's why I was confused. I knew that there was a discussion and I knew that there had been a summary judgment made by the group.
No, there wasn't.
It was an
Dick
individual
just
statement.
posted.
No.
And so
Okay.
we never talked about this.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. That's what I'm looking for.
Howard Broadbeck. I would like to propose a different wording for this, and maybe it's not really what Mike had in mind, but for two reasons. One is I think it's important that we stress the zero-based budget concept, and it's not really anywhere else on the list of things to vote on. And the second reason is my impression from the 12 department heads who gave presentations to us over the last 10 weeks is they all strongly believe that their departments are currently right-sized, or they might even be too small. So I think that, so here, let me just throw out how I think, or how I would like to see this worded, so that it stresses zero-based budgeting, which is something that I think we can leave with the council as not just a one-off thing, but it's something that they can use in years going forward to use as a way to make sure they understand what's coming before them and how it affects what they're spending. So the way I would suggest this is to change this wording to say, and I'll say it slowly so we can get it, going forward, use zero-based budgeting from current actual expenditures to right-size city departments. And so what I'm going back to here is we had a $44 million expenditure run rate that Larry Lang gave us, must be 5 weeks ago. And that would imply that going forward, he would develop something along those lines, and when the city came for a new budget, that's what they'd start with. They'd start with, okay, we know our run rate is $44 million or whatever it became, $47 million, and now we're saying the budget should be, for example, I'll use the 2010-2011 numbers we were given, which is expenditures of $52 million. So it would give the city council the opportunity to say, okay, show me how you go from 44 to 52. I want to see a detailed but understandable step from 44 to 52, so they know the details of what is the normal operating expenditures of the city and the other stuff that's going in there. So again, my thing on the table is I'd like to change this to going forward, use zero-based budgeting from current actual expenditures to right-size city departments.
What is current actual expenditures? You mean those
in
estimates?
No, in the case of what Larry gave us, it was the through December 09, ongoing expenses. So it wasn't the one-offs, and it was not capital
But
expenditure.
that wasn't 44 through
Yeah.
December.
Yeah, it was. That was the 44 number.
The 44 was for the 12 months ending June, right? He estimated the following.
Okay, yeah, you're right. You're right. That was an estimate through
But
June.
is the number important?
Yeah, whether it's that number, it's using some type of current actual to build the budget for the following year, instead of what I think we've seen more of is taking the previous year's budget and saying, okay, here's how I'm adjusting the previous year's budget.
Does everybody get that? I think it really is the same thing ultimately as ZBB.
I would say start with prior year's actual.
Prior year's actual, okay. And that's what you're saying, prior year's actual.
Yeah. Not the estimate.
Yeah. From the current actual, we're going to...
Prior year's
same thing. Prior year?
Shaking his head.
Oh, okay.
way to say it.
Prior, I see the difference. I didn't see, yeah. Because prior year's a full year once removed. Okay.
Now, Howard,
Because it doesn't help to go to December and use that.
if we use the current actuals,
Prior year's actual.
I'm sorry, prior year actuals, if a department is not currently appropriately sized,
You mean either too much or too little?
right, how will we be able to reflect that? How will that show up?
It's putting the onus on the city management to show city council how they get to the next year's budget from what's currently being spent, rather than taking the last budget estimate they had and either raising or lowering from that point. That's really all it is. And to me, that starting with the budget, either a previous budget or an adjusted budget or some other estimate, that generated for me from the very first week a lot of confusion, right? And it wasn't until we got this run rate information that it seemed to me there was more clarity. And the thing that was different for me, and I think for others of us as well, and what makes this more confusing is that capital expenditures get thrown in with operating expenditures in these city expense amounts. So all this data we had that we started with, that wasn't apparent what was capital and what was not. So pulling that out and using a run rate as a zero base is, to me, is clearer than adjusting up or down from previous budgets, because budgets are really just estimates, right?
Right.
So.
And I guess I drive the question at is, we had the discussion when Public Works made their presentation, and Public Works went from Public Works and Water back to, as two separate agencies, now back to one Public Works department. With that, Charles had mentioned that he's got duplicate positions now. So if we've got duplication that would theoretically necessitate elimination, the budget isn't going to show that. So I don't know how we would, is what we're saying here going to get us to right-sizing that organization?
Well, one would hope that whoever is presenting this is not trying to hide stuff. So if there were 10 positions that were no longer needed, and they didn't bring it up, to me that would either be I'm not thinking of the right word, but it would either be
well, don't put a word in there. I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's either incompetent or it's willful misdirection, or however you want to say it.
Okay.
Willful misdirection.
Malfeasance.
Yes, sir.
We are only looking for a starting point here.
Are we okay with this? So right sizing, we're going to use this language, which you'll know when you get up there, it's going forward prior to year's actuals. Maximize energy conservation. This is just kind of a
catch-all.
Yeah, a lot of things. I assume there's no quarrel with that. Consider future exploration of privatization and competition. Okay, that links a little bit up with property use, but it also is a broad item. Not a lot of specifics that we're trying to throw into it yet, but you'll have those in a minute. You okay with that? Share SRO, school resource officers, share costs with schools and other partnerships. This was looking at partnerships in general, where we can burden the person we're serving with some of the expenses of providing the service. Where right now I think it was a 0-100% split. So that was the kind of thing that was focused on there. Enhanced stadium revenues and retail opportunities. That focused very specifically on that enterprise.
Yeah, I'd like to, Howard Broadbeck, I'd like to offer an enhancement to this if people would like to consider it. And that is that we all know that there's an $8 million bill coming to the citizens every year from the stadium. And to me, putting some type of P&L incentive on whoever has responsibility for running that is the best recommendation we could make for enhancing stadium revenues. After hearing the presentations from the Parks and Recs folks, I believe that they are working hard to enhance revenues and the retail there. But on the other side, from my business experience, I know that when you put someone's salary on a significant portion of it on an incentive basis, they are much more willing to take risks and try things. And I think we might get a much faster or more creative solutions to reducing that $8 million cost to us if we had the folks who were in charge of that in some way have some kind of incentive comp.
Comment, folks.
I'd like to see that added. It makes sense to me. We make more off of hot dogs than we do tickets. There are other things that we could do to help generate money. And
bonuses are a very tricky thing. Very tricky thing. Equity of treatment.
This is Mike. Yeah, can legally you do that?
You almost have to do it across the board for a set of standards that are very clearly prescribed for all employees.
Or for example, you could hire it out. Okay, you could, in some way, hire a consultant to run the stadium. Okay, and you say, okay, Mr. Consultant. Now it could be Nathan. Okay, you say, Nathan, you're now going to be an independent contractor, and we're going to write a contract that here's how you make your money, and go from there.
That's good, yes.
I guess that might sound more like privatization, but I think it's this whole incentive comp that
Make $1 million, Nathan. You know, we don't care because we'll be making a whole lot more too.
Are you okay? Do we understand this language?
Well, I think that needs to
Stadium.
be changed, doesn't it?
What would you change it
To where it would be extended to be privatized, that we would hire a consultant that would help generate revenues for our stadium?
Joe, Mike, yeah, for purposes of voting, is it clear enough? I mean, we're going to have to embellish all these to some degree.
So that becomes one way to enhance revenues.
Right.
Okay.
I don't want to necessarily just limit it to just that. I mean, I think there's probably other areas and other aspects.
That's true.
So just for purposes of voting, is it clear, I guess, is my question.
Are you okay with it? Expand volunteer support, i.e. citizen patrols. That was, again, very broad. Patrols came up a couple times. People volunteering for things where it's maybe consistent with their skill set and their career, actually making significant contributions. It's a broadening of the volunteer system to a larger scale. And the last one, set and enforce a stringent alarm ordinance. That was, as I recall, probably right in one of the top few also, to do something, because I think the chief said it was 90-some% false. 98% false, and the time consumed by that is significant. This was a very specific interest.
This is Mike Kiek. Looking at page 5, with that as the last item on page 5.
Yes, sir.
Does that duplicate what's on page 2 when we said consider new fees, false alarm?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think it could end up being in there, but this was more than fees. This was enforcement. This is a different. I'm sorry.
What I understand.
Could you use the mic, sir? I'll give you your own.
Alasario, from what I understand from the alarms, that they were planning on eliminating the fee, the permit fee for the resident, and then going ahead with this stringent alarm ordinance.
I think the fee that they were talking about was a punitive fee.
Yes, the penalty,
like
fine, like a fine.
Ticket, a fine.
This is Mike Kiek. From what the data read, that's the way it read to me. The way that reads, it doesn't sound like a revenue generation or a cost reduction to me. So it seems out of family with all of the other items.
Okay. Okay. What would you say?
Meaning, to me, it seems more like a general recommendation, not necessarily specific to...
This was to set a policy for the council to adopt a policy.
Understood.
I mean, so that clearly was the set is too abbreviated, but the intention was set a policy and enforce a stringent policy for an alarm ordinance. That's clear enough?
I don't see how that has to do with the budget.
How it adds to the budget? Yes. Well, alarm ordinances consume false alarms consume a tremendous amount of police time. If you have a stringent ordinance where your first offense is free, the second time your son comes home at midnight and opens the door and doesn't shut it off and we have to come to your house, it's $250. The next time, so you pay the cost of the police coming out, in essence, like you would if you pulled a false.
I thought we were already doing that.
Don't
you get 3 false alarms and then you have to pay a fee after the 4th?
As I understand, Alasario, as I understand it, that the police chief is studying this right now. And some of that is still there, but a lot of it is being changed.
Well, he
And if the
presented
city-
it as enough of a concern that several of you felt that was, so that's why it's up there.
It went to city council a couple of sessions back. It's going to come back again, I heard.
So there we have it. You're going to have to do a little circling of the items on your... But ready for this?
Can we, I have one question. If we're, have, what would be now sixth grade, right? Is that correct?
Okay.
We have sixth green and 2 reds.
You have 2 reds.
Right,
You have 4 these colors.
okay.
You have 2 these
Darker green, okay. And those are the
And so,
generated.
yeah, again, yes. Is that what you'd like to do, have the 2 dark green be specifically for
Revenue.
revenue? But I wouldn't want to preclude people from using the others on revenue.
Well, they can use whatever color, but those are the priority revenue generating.
I just want you to know, if someone wants to use a red on a revenue, that's fine.
Right. And if you use 2 dots or 3 dots or 4
You
dots
can
on
only,
one thing.
1 per unit. You can't put more than, if we see, you cannot use your number twice on the same item. You cannot use your number twice on the same item, so you can't batch them. So you've got to make 8 decisions here, separate and distinct. Now, and that's why they're all numbered. That'll make it very easy to make sure that there are no duplications. You need to write your name on this. What we're going to do after you do this and you're all done. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I don't understand, but could you say it again? So we've got 8 total dots, and we can't put more than 1 dot next to any one thing?
Yeah, you'll hit 8 items, yes, sir.
Okay. And we're not going to do revenue separately from...
Well, there seems to be a bias for that, and I think I mentioned that I didn't see how it would be any different, but I think if you want to collectively, this is a question for you to agree to or not, the 2 that I added this evening when I got here, you could use exclusively for revenue if you choose to, but you can also use these for revenue if you want to.
But can't we use the dark green for cost as well?
I'm all in favor of you using these anywhere you want to, and I think it'll come out exactly the same.
One way, why wouldn't we restrict? I mean, we aren't going to restrict it one way.
I'm just trying to respect Joan's request.
Well, Gary
Well,
has.
this was really
Gary,
Gary's
it
suggestion
wasn't
last
John.
week that we do revenue separate from cost. And I'm not objecting to anything. I just want to understand what it is.
My bias, my strong suggestion, because this is going to be a lot easier, is just to use these any way you want to. You get 2 primaries, you get 6 secondaries. It's going to come out.
But you can't put more than 1.
That's correct. You
On
can't
each
batch
thing.
it, right. Yes, sir.
Okay. So that's different than what I thought we said last week.
When I started now, but I corrected myself last week. I went home and made some, in certain settings that's good. In this setting, it just will not work. So I'm going to hand these out, put your name on them, and then when you're done, we will collect them, and Mike and I, while you take a break, will post all of these. We have duplicate dots, so you won't lose your vote. It'll still be held. And you'll see the composite up here.
Okay, how are we going to handle our 1 caller?
We'll call them.
Okay.
We will call them as soon as we get people working. We'll need a number.
Okay, I can give you Charles' number and
Put it
somebody
anywhere you
can
want
call
to.
them.
Pardon me, I need to call them through our system, yes.
All right.
You just call him and tell him how he voted.
Folks, if he doesn't have a point of reference there, we're simply not going to be able to include his votes.
Well, couldn't you just read them to him?
I
and then
can't
he
read
could tell
20
you?
items and have him remember them all.
Well, I don't know.
Yes, sir.
We're telling everyone that reduced employee compensation is now 1 item.
Yes, sir, exactly like up there. Why don't you mark that on your sheet and put a square around it?
And then the other one, the 3 that are grouped together.
The other 3 that are grouped together also, yes, sir.
Where do you put that?
Just draw and make
Oh, you just, okay.
Beneath or anywhere.
These colors have no value. It's all the same.
Up there, then we want 4 to get together?
Draw a box around those.
We have to stretch before we do this.
Okay, just so I know this, we have
Then the rest of them are equal.
these 4 are 1 item, is that
Let me
correct?
explain to you how I know what it is, Gary. You don't vote on any revenue stuff. It's only for cost.
No, right, I understand that. But I just want to make sure that reduce employee, the bottom 2 on page 2 and the top 2 on page 3 are 1 item, is that correct?
At every
And then-
meeting, why he tried to get
Which,
his work to
okay,
allow
I'm
him
sorry.
to get off.
Okay, so these 3 are 1 item also.
We asked him to take this.
Okay, I got it.
It was on the net.
Well, it wasn't, he said he checked this morning and it wasn't on this
It's been
morning.
on there.
What happened to the blue one?
So,
If he doesn't have it.
Dick?
Yes, sir.
What happened to the blue?
There's no blue.
No blue? No, sir. No. Somewhere else I thought there was.
No, I said last week, if you want to get extra ones, I'll go get some blue, and then I found that we had greens.
Why do we have a dark green in the light?
Because tonight, I added these two. Wait, how come you, what number are you?
I'm three.
That
I'm
one's
three.
gonna have number 15.
Oh, that's why I have extra. you
Yeah, forget
see?
that. It gets-
Okay,
it
now I
gets
feel
stuck.
better. Okay. Yeah, I got extra.
did they combine these consider?
So when I had extra ones right away.
Right, just to,
Yeah.
okay.
I thought it was a blue one.
Just put it on one of the new consider new fees. And now
So all 4 consider new fees were put together?
Yeah, they started off.
No, right there.
Revenue generated.
Oh. All of those together? Or just 3? Oh. I included it.
I thought I knew what I'm doing, but you know what? That's it. Yeah, I got them all. Do I get to keep the clip?
And that's so. I mean, but I don't even know. And I think some of them don't even know. Hold on. We'll see it. Right. Yeah. It has the solution. It should be labeled catastrophe. And that would probably be. I mean, and that's why. You know.
Well, say somebody was telling me. Anyway. Where do we go with this? We give this to the Enormous Balance Association or what?
I just follow the leader. If the leader's wrong, it's their fault.
Terrorist attempt in country. On a flight from DC to Denver, I won't issue them.
Good suggestion. Help a lot. Huh? It'll help a lot to make a more effective presentation.
I went there as recently.
I mean, at this point in time, we voted. There's nothing more to deliberate. I would think that by email we could.
Don't sit there. Those seats are terrible.
Take a look at this.
Get down to the common denominator, because I didn't want the...
There should be a sentence under each one, like a sentence.
Make your dot count.
I like your idea about the zero-based budgeting. That is
Best thing is very important.
very good.
Earned your pay. Next in the mail for you, Bob. I say the same thing about my engineer.
That's very serious.
Everybody except her. There has to be a change. And they took reductions. They took a reduction.
lived in Doral Plaza,
Down here.
right next to the Prudential Building. You know, we lived on the 26th floor, and we didn't own a car.
Difference in the value of rent without applying a multiplier. That's why we've got everybody viewpoint up here. Let me just suggest to you what appears to me to be correct. Right side city departments and the reduced employee compensation package. I for first.
Which one? Which is the one?
Jump in if you see if you find.
Wait, Dick, could you explain how, is it the red, are you, you know,
Yes, taking into account if there's.
how did you tally the votes? So
Without giving you a precise numerical.
that's fine, I can live with that.
When there's a preponderance of red, it means it's important to a significant component of the group, and those reds have a heavier weight. 1.5 to 1, 2 to 1, but you can't ignore the reds.
Got it.
If I had 2 reds and 3 greens, I would take the 2 reds. In this case, these stood out quite distinctly as very heavy. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, I've got 8 reds, 8 reds, 4 greens, 8 reds, 4 greens.
Yeah.
The exact same.
My count.
And I think they're by far ahead of others. Then the second one appears to me to be a third. It'd be 3, 1, 1, 3, right? It's a restructuring of their. Restructuring of debt. Number 4, supporting economic development. You can quarrel with these because they're likely to have included some. But here's the moment. That's 5 for. 5 is the adjusting rainy day fund policy to help with recession. Number 6 is enhanced.
Slow down, Dick. Slow down. So number 5 was what again, I'm sorry?
Just rainy day fund?
5, 3 reds, 2 greens.
Okay.
Adjusting rainy day fund.
6?
Enhanced stadium revenues and retail. 12 green, 1 red.
Okay.
I can give it to you.
7?
5. 7.
Oh, there was more than 1 6?
Restructured debt.
I'm sorry.
Oh, type for 7?
7 is suspend capital projects, and that's the same as reduce their. One is 8 green, 1 red. This is 1 red, 8 green, 2 dark. We could have given, but that has some emphasis on revenue production, but it's tied. 7, 7. So we go to 9. Eliminate frozen positions. Following that is cut operating costs.
11?
Yeah, I'm just following you on it.
10. Where's 10?
Property tax.
Where did the billboard one?
Small business breakfast seminars.
Billboard is over here.
Be successful, and space is.
There's 12. I may have not put in 11.
Yes, page 4.
I'm sorry. Okay.
11 was property tax?
Oh, there it is. I'm sorry. Here it is. Sure it is. Right there is 11.
Okay.
Property tax. 12. Billboards along major rights of way. 13. It's interesting because we got just about everything in here. 15. No new debt in 10, 11. 14. Is oh, here it is. Consider new fees, false alarm. Really ties to that one over there. And 15. Free salaries, which they really tail off about halfway down, but those are your prioritization of those items. So in keeping with what we talked about at the beginning, would it be acceptable to you if we go back to the in rank order? I'll start taking some notes on what you might think are some subsets of this that you'd like to see included in the report. Do that one by one.
Now? Yeah.
Your thoughts?
Howard Broadbeck, I'd like to suggest, is this something, I didn't understand your extra weeks when you started saying at the beginning. So would the committee want to consider, again, assigning you and Mike to take what's there now, because you generated the list initially, put in your 1 or 2 sentences or whatever it is you think the bullets are under each one, and then just post it like by Monday.
Yes.
So that we can see it for a couple days before we show up here Wednesday. And the assignment Wednesday would be, if you have anything you really want to modify for this, come prepared to do that. And if you don't, at least show up to tell us that this looks pretty good. Because you're going to attach all this other stuff to it anyway,
Yes,
right?
that's correct.
Yeah, and my thought is, I don't mean, don't take this the wrong way, but my expectation is not too many city councilmen are going to read much more than the highlights, right? And maybe a couple of bullet points underneath it. So, and I didn't understand why we'd have to go past next week.
We may not. I just wanted to make sure we carved a path, because, but that's all. That's the only reason. Mike, are you okay with that? It's going to take a little bit of your time.
The question is, what do you guys want? I mean, I personally think we can include them all in some way, shape, or form, but it seems to me like the top 15, I'm sorry, Mike Kiak, it seems to me like the top 15, clearly, in terms of just the sheer volume of votes, we're separating red and greens, if you will. I mean, by the time you get to the 15, you're really kind of running out of gas relative to significance in terms of, I'm just standing here looking back at the color, okay? And it seems to me like when you're getting past maybe even 10, yeah, it seems like the voting just kind of tapers off real quick. So it seems like we had a lot of items, a lot of votes for maybe the top 10 as the most significant that the committee as a whole has voted for. Would you prefer we go through all of them, or would you prefer that we make sure we get the top 10 right relative to the recommendations? I'll leave it up to you. I'll write them all if that's what you want. I'm willing to do that. But what seems to me that there are certain ones up there that clearly carry the most weight of this committee.
Gary Gilzer. What I would really like to see is some type of sliding bullet points. So in other words, the top 5 items on major categories on this list might have 4 or 5 bullet points underneath that were the underlying themes that created the category name. And then maybe the next, maybe 6 through 10 would have 2 or 3 bullet points underneath each one, and then 11 through 15, just this is the category and this is what the committee thought. And I think that's going to really give the gist to both the sense of the committee and give council some direction on what the citizens are thinking.
How do you feel? Is it acceptable to you that Mike and I wrestle with this, get something posted by Monday that we'll call a draft, and then we can next Wednesday go over that and determine what needs to be changed? If that happens and we can do it at that bit of time, I think we are done with the signature after that. Yes, sir.
Greg Hansen. I agree with Gary that you take the top 10, and the first 5, you provide quite a bit of detail for some guidance. Second 5, a little bit less, so you're at least giving the intent of the committee, what we all feel. Then the other remaining 5 or 10, whatever it comes up with, it's a recommendation, do what you want with it, however you see fit. And then I also want to ask that on these 5 pages, if we could post online the dot makeup for each one, if that's part of,
Absolutely.
if we can make sure that that's posted up so everybody can have a copy.
And we'll do it exactly the same way.
Okay.
5 red, 10 green, 2 dark.
And I have no problem with you two guys wrestling the details, just from my perspective.
The way we've done this, the way we did it last time, we did this completely independently without talking, got together. And
We'll do it again the same way.
And just to build on what you said, I think you should bring these 5 pages back next week and post them here the same way, just so if there's any questions about it, we have it right here.
I get that. Just for everybody, just so you know, I independently checked math and dots, and we both made sure that the scores and the numbers and all that kind of stuff, independent of each other, matched. And if we had any question, we resolved it real time. So
what you see up there is a consensus both in terms of priority and in terms of scores and all that kind of stuff, so we both independently checked each other.
I am fine with both of you doing that. My one thing that you may have to wrestle a little deeper with is the billboards along major roads, because my understanding that it's against the law or the city ordinances for the city of Goodyear that the private citizen cannot do that. So can the city put billboards on their property?
So I don't, that's a question that has to
Yeah.
be addressed if they want to do
Right.
that, because if the law was created by Goodyear, it can be changed by Goodyear. Those kinds of things. But I think there's probably a lot of issues that remain in the operationalizing of some of these.
So again, there's an example where you could view it as a revenue generator, but you could also view it as an expense. I mean, it's going to take some effort to get all of the ducks lined up, if you will, to make it happen. Once you set the thing up, you're going to have to pay for maintenance costs for the thing. So again, that's where the struggle is for us, is that when we got together and talked, we'd be kind of going, well, is that really a revenue or is that really a cost? And so we debated that as we went through.
And to not be scared off by all the current rules, because those are questions that have to be addressed whether they change them or not. What else would you like folks to see?
I guess one point is that if we come up with a recommendation, it gets posted, we come back together next week, vote, what's the plan then relative to final presentation?
Well, if there were no changes whatsoever, then we would simply ask everybody to sign it, which I think would be very nice to have all the members of the committee sign it. And then you determine who's going to present it to the city council.
Well, how about, if you're going to post it Monday,
Yes, sir.
can't people email you directly if they have a suggestion as they read it?
That's great.
And then you could come with not only what you and Mike wrote, but in red, okay, here are a couple comments I had.
Absolutely. Yeah, any information you can get to us early on, that'd be great.
I mean, Mike, I would think we could finalize it real time next week, right?
That would be really nice.
Yeah, if somebody had a computer here with a printer, we could get to the end, they could print it, and we could all sign it, we'd be done.
I think we can arrange that, sure. Good idea.
It seems like we found our way to move forward, but I would just like to go on record and thank Mike for his hard work. I know we have scrutinized every single one of these recommendations, but I know it must have taken a considerable amount of effort to consolidate all of our ideas. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for agreeing to help move this forward in a full report.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
He's not done representing us yet. The thank yous come at the end. No, I'm teasing you, Mike.
All right, thank you.
Anything else, folks, for the good of the order?
I did have one point of clarification. I was a little surprised that the employee compensation package came out number one. Maybe I shouldn't be so surprised. I understand that's a huge component of operational costs, but I want to make sure it's clear, because I think that we as a committee established that public safety was something that we held in high regard and did not want to impact. And I also want to remind that Fire had presented that they gave back a tremendous amount of benefit. The employees specifically had done some give-backs as far as overtime and as well as uniform expenses. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, that if we start talking about furloughs and other cuts to employee packages, that even though we as a committee came up number one with that we be really careful about how we do that as we proceed.
I don't think that we're even looking at the people so much that are out in the trenches and working as we are at people at the administrative levels.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, but we need to make sure that that's very clear in our as we represent our ideas.
We're going to have to share something that's consistent with the database on which we've made this and the comments that we've made throughout. And I think it is appropriate perhaps to consider in there that several people indicated a preference for not dealing with public safety. But it wasn't everybody, and there are other voices in that, but we'll certainly, I think it will be absolutely reasonable. But it's not, you can't construct anything.
We had talked when we were putting this together about somehow connecting the engaged employees and identifying the cost reduction scenarios with the reduction in employee compensation. Will you guys be reflecting that in your comments? Because I realize that.
That to
Right, so I realize it was kind of voted separately and independently, and there's one green dot up there, but just to make sure that Mike, if that's representative of what we want, that Mike and Dick both are aware of that.